Hale, I know you paid off the entire $5.2 million mortgage, but we are putting the house in Noah's name. That was the sentence that cracked the air open. My mother said it lightly, almost sweetly, as if she were announcing the dessert menu, not gutting 5 years of my life in front of a dinner table full of witnesses. My hand stopped mid-air, fingers wrapped around the stem of a wine glass that suddenly felt too thin to hold. The room did not go silent, it thickened. Forks scraped plates in slow motion. A distant laugh curled and died halfway through the sound. Even the chandelier light above us dimmed in my vision until it felt like I was looking at the world through a sheet of warped glass. I kept my eyes on her. Linda Evans, my mother. Perfect hair, perfect blouse, perfect timing to humiliate me in her Palo Alto dining room with its polished oak table and the smell of rosemary chicken still hanging in the air. Noah sat beside her, already leaning back like he had been expecting this gift the way some people expect birthday cake. 2 aunts, 1 uncle, a retired neighbor from across the street, and 2 of Noah's friends from his gym all turned their heads toward me at the exact same slow speed, waiting for the grateful daughter to smile through the blow. My mother did not stop. She never did. She followed up with the second cut before I could form a single breath. "You are good with money. You will be fine anywhere. This house needs a real man to carry it. A real man, not me, not the daughter who had wired every absurd payment on time down to the last cent." One of my aunts chimed in with a syrupy giggle. "You should be proud, honey. Not everyone gets to give their brother a multi-million-dollar start." She said it like I had just tied a bow on a present instead of carving pieces out of my own life to keep the roof over their heads. My throat tightened, not with tears, but with the pressure of holding everything inside. My breath felt heavier, pushed down by the weight of a humiliation designed so perfectly that even people who barely knew me would walk away, convinced this was an honor. The red wine in my glass trembled slightly. I stared at the thin ring of it bleeding onto the tablecloth, a small spreading circle, and tried to anchor myself to it before the room tipped completely sideways. Inside my head, the words rose sharp and quiet. They are not just taking the house, they are taking the story. Every year I turned my back into a living mortgage payment. Every raise I never celebrated. Every night I sat alone in my apartment calculating how to keep them safe. But my mother was not finished. She wanted her final strike to land in front of an audience. And Hale, I do not want you making tonight about money. Do not bring your attitude to Noah's big moment. Attitude. Like I had walked in to ruin a celebration instead of sitting here watching them turn my sacrifices into his achievement. Noah smirked, tapping his fork against his plate like a drumline of entitlement. "Come on, Hale. You hate this house anyway. You are basically just making it official." My ears rang, not from anger, from the sheer absurdity of being erased so thoroughly that even the person who benefited most believed he was owed what I had earned. Everyone was watching me now, waiting for me to nod, to accept, to smile, to perform my role as the reliable daughter who never argues, never pushes back, never forces anyone to see her. My fingers loosened from the glass. I set it down gently, the way you lower something fragile when you are not sure if it will survive the landing. My voice sounded calm, too calm. "So in your version, what exactly am I?" My mother ignored the question with the precision of a woman who had practiced this moment in her head until she could perform it flawlessly. She lifted her glass and gave the smallest, proud smile. To Noah, the new owner of our family home. Glasses lifted around the table, a chorus of approval, a toast built on the bones of my silence. The room blurred for a second, then sharpened. Something inside me, something that had bent for years, stopped bending. My face did not break. It froze into something cool and unreadable. Pain shifting into clarity, hurt thinning into steel. My mother clinked her glass with Noah's. I watched them. Then I watched myself watching them. And for the first time, I felt the exact moment the story changed hands. Not the house, the story. And I was not going to let them keep either. I used to believe there was a logic to the way my family divided the world, that there was some hidden fairness in how they treated me and Noah. But the truth was always more blunt than that, and it began years before the dinner, where my mother erased 5 years of my life in a single sentence. I am 26 now, a machine learning engineer, working for a mid-sized AI company in Mountain View. Most mornings, I drive to work in a faded silver hatchback with a sticky ignition and a radio that sometimes drops signal near the 101 overpass. I live in a small apartment tucked behind an auto shop and a Vietnamese bakery, the kind of place where the walls hum whenever the neighbors microwave something. It is not glamorous, but it is mine, and it is paid for by my own work. Noah is 23. He quit college after 2 confused semesters, bounced through jobs at gyms and startups and coffee shops, then eventually settled into what seems to be the only full-time position he ever held, which is living comfortably in the Palo Alto house that I helped keep from foreclosure long before anyone clapped for him. Thinking about that difference feels like flipping through photographs that had always been there, but suddenly sharpened into brutal clarity. I can still see my mother pulling Noah into her arms, both of them standing in the living room with the afternoon light coming through the windows. She stroked his hair while saying, "You are my baby, this house is for your future." The certainty in her voice had weight, like the house was already wrapped with his name on it, and she had spent years preparing the bow. And then there was me. A teenage girl holding a permission slip for a field trip to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, a trip that cost $70. I stood in the kitchen doorway waiting for the right moment to ask, and when I finally did, her answer came out in the same tone she used when turning off lights or closing cabinets. "We are saving for the house. You are smart, you will figure it out." It was not cruel in volume, but in consequence. And like most daughters who learn early not to make things harder, I figured it out. I babysat for neighbors. I stayed up late doing extra credit to avoid disappointing teachers. I packed lunches so I would not need cafeteria money. It all seemed normal then. The imbalance did not announce itself with shouting or slammed doors. It was soft, almost polite favoritism, the kind that families in California suburbs practice like a quiet tradition, passing it down without ever naming it. As an adult, I see how expertly it shaped us. In the present day, my mother tells people Noah is the future of this house, while she calls me the safety net, as if I exist only to catch whatever slips from their hands. She never says it with gratitude. It is more like a business model she trusts. If anything ever goes wrong, we have Hale. She lands on her feet. I used to hear that and feel proud, like I was competent, reliable, even admired. Now it rings differently. It sounds like I am the spare wheel in the trunk, the thing you depend on and forget about until you need it, and afterwards you toss it back without a second thought. These snapshots swirl through my head as I sit at that Palo Alto dining table, the same table where report cards and Thanksgiving pies once sat in front of me. Though back then I thought the room felt warm because it was family. Now I know it felt warm because I had set myself on fire to keep it that way. The unfairness was not cinematic, it was ordinary. It was my mother giving Noah the bigger bedroom because boys need space to grow. It was Noah getting a used Jeep on his 17th birthday, while I took the bus to school because I was responsible enough to handle it. It was relatives telling him he would take over the house someday while nudging me to study finance so I could help my parents with bills. It was never about talent or effort or need. It was about expectation. His future was an inheritance. Mine was a duty. The strangest part is that I did not question it until the night everything cracked open. I lived for years thinking my role was chosen out of love. That being the one they could count on meant I belonged somewhere solid in their plans. But the dinner proved otherwise. It showed me that reliability was not affection. It was leverage. The more dependable I became, the less they needed to see me at all. Watching Noah grin across the table that night made the flashbacks sting with a new vividness. Every memory rearranged itself like a puzzle, whose picture I had misunderstood for years. All the times my mother said, "You will figure it out." All the times she told relatives, "Hale does not need help. She is fine." All the times Noah failed upward because the house was waiting for him. They were not quirks or harmless preferences. They were the architecture of a family where my labor was invisible and his convenience was destiny. And yet I still wanted to believe we shared the same roof in more than a physical way. I still wanted to believe being the responsible one meant something honorable. But as I sat frozen at that dinner table with my mother's words still vibrating in the air, I could feel a clean, cold realization forming at the base of my spine. I thought being the one they could count on meant I had a place here. Turns out, it just meant my spine was their backup line of credit. The memory of that night in the dining room kept replaying as a kind of emotional echo, but the real origin of everything went back to 2021. When my mother first pulled me into the crisis, she would later pretend never involved me at all. It was the year after a tech layoff ripple hit Silicon Valley. My stepfather lost his job in March, and by late summer, my mother began to sound frantic in every conversation. One evening, she called me on FaceTime. The screen lit up with the familiar view of the Palo Alto kitchen. The overhead lights were too bright, reflecting off stacks of unopened envelopes spread across the counter, like a fan of warning signs. Behind her, the refrigerator hummed in a way I recognized from childhood, the background noise of a house built on pressure. She lifted a handful of letters toward the camera, and even through the pixelation, I could see the bank logo stamped across each envelope. Her voice wavered and she said, "The mortgage is $5.2 million. The interest rate is climbing. We have already missed 2 payments. If we lose this house, I have nothing. Noah has nothing." She did not mention me, which somehow made the words colder. It was as if my existence only mattered when she needed something, but in the inventory of what would be lost, I was not included. I felt something inside tighten, but I pushed the feeling down the way I had learned to do from the time I was a teenager. I asked her to set the phone down so I could see the paperwork. She shifted the camera angle. The envelopes were thick, and the print on the notices was the kind that makes your stomach drop, even when the debt does not belong to you. Foreclosure warning. Upcoming penalty interest insurance lapses. She kept talking, but her words blurred under the weight of numbers that were now forcing my brain into calculation mode. 5.2 million owed, 2 payments missed, fees accruing at a speed that would make recovery nearly impossible without immediate intervention. I knew what it meant. If the bank took the house, it would shatter whatever was left of their stability. And I also knew that if I stepped in, I would be stepping into a role I might never be able to step out of. Still, I heard myself saying before I could think through the consequences, I can cover the payments until you are stable. My mother froze for only a heartbeat, then latched onto the offer so quickly it was like she had been waiting for the exact moment to grab it. "You would really do that?" she asked, but not with tenderness, more like she was confirming a transaction. "You know, it is a lot." The tone was not gratitude. It was expectation wrapped in false humility. I nodded because the alternative was watching my family fall apart in a way I was not ready to witness. She exhaled like someone who had just been handed a life jacket, then began rummaging through drawers until she found the refinance packet the bank had sent. When she held it up to the screen, I saw the forms were already halfway filled out. I do not know if that hurt more or if it simply made sense that she had started the process without telling me. We set up a call with the bank officer the next morning. I sat in a conference room at work with the door closed while he spoke through the speakerphone in a firm, patient voice explaining the conditions. He said, "We will need Hale as co-borrower. Her income and credit rating carry most of this." My mother nodded as if the implications meant nothing. She did not ask for clarification. She did not pause to consider what it meant for me to be legally tied to a $5.2 million mortgage on a house I did not live in. She simply accepted it because accepting it solved her immediate panic. I listened to the officer outline the interest rate, changes the penalty structure, the terms of the refinance. I took notes because that is what I do when information matters, but I felt something else, threading through the moment, a thin, invisible cord that connected me to a responsibility far heavier than the officer realized. The astonishing part was how easily my mother moved through the conversation with him. She did not absorb the details the way I did. She did not grasp the weight of signing my name onto a loan whose size could break most people. She simply wanted the immediate relief, and I provided it. When the documents were emailed to us, she forwarded them without a message. Just the attachments. No thank you. No hesitation. I printed them at the office after hours and sat alone with the stack in front of me. It felt surreal to hold the future of a house worth millions in my hands in papers that reduced everything to signatures and interest percentages. I reached the final page where the line for borrower waited blank. My full name, Hale Evans, typed neatly beneath it. I remembered my mother saying, "If we lose this house, I have nothing. Noah has nothing." And I realized none of this was about me having something. It was about me preventing them from having nothing. I signed. The pen felt heavier than it should have. As the ink dried, I stared at my signature and felt a small, unmistakable shift in the air around me. I had become the person holding back the flood, even though no one in that house would ever say it out loud. Later, when I emailed the documents back to the bank, I felt the magnitude but not the recognition. That would come much later in anger and clarity. In that moment, there was only duty. I read the interest rate. I did not read my own name as the only person holding back the flood. After signing the refinance documents in 2021, I slipped into a rhythm that did not feel like a choice, so much as a quiet contract with myself. If I had stepped into the role of the person holding back the flood, then I would do it thoroughly and without complaint. The months blurred into a sequence of long workdays and late-night payments. By the end of 2021, I was spending more time in the Mountain View office than in my own apartment. The open space layout always felt too bright during the day and too hollow after 6 in the evening. I would sit at my desk with a hoodie draped over my chair code pulled up on one monitor and the mortgage account on another. When my company issued year-end bonuses, I opened the email, saw the numbers, then quietly sold a portion of my RSU and transferred $400,000 into the mortgage account. The wire confirmation always came through with a short electronic chime. No celebration, no conversation, just the silent removal of a large piece of my future. In 2022, the pattern deepened. Raises came. More RSU vested. I worked through product launches and model deadlines, often staring at the faint reflection of my own face in the screen during late nights. At tax season, I sold more stock and sent $600,000 to the same account that held the house steady, while my mother told her friends she was fighting tooth and nail to keep it afloat. "We have fought so hard to keep this place," she said one afternoon to our neighbor who lived across from the Palo Alto house. She used the word "we" without hesitation. I heard the recording she left on the family group chat. I listened to the casual certainty in her voice. She never said my name, never even hinted that someone outside that house was carrying the weight that allowed her to speak so confidently. In 2023, the stakes rose again as interest rates fluctuated and payments adjusted slightly. I reviewed my finances in a way that became ritual. Another vesting event, another bonus. I sold additional RSU and transferred $800,000 to the mortgage. My hands did not shake, but the rest of me felt like something was being carved slowly, steadily, without anesthesia. I kept track of each year in an Excel sheet that I updated late at night. One tab, titled Mom Mortgage versus My Net Worth, displayed 2 lines. The first line showing the mortgage balance plummeting every year. The second line showing my own net worth barely moving, because every upward gain was immediately drained into keeping a house I did not live in from being swallowed by the bank. Staring at those lines felt like staring at the truth in numbers. I could not argue with them. They reflected the shape of my life with painful accuracy. During these years, the small toxic details sharpened around the edges of my routine. My mother continued hosting neighbors in the front yard on warm evenings. I overheard her say, "We have fought so hard to keep this place," with a sigh, that implied a shared struggle between her and her husband. Not once did she acknowledge the person earning the income or the person selling stock to cover what she called her fight. Noah repeated the same dismissive line whenever finances came up. "Must be nice being good with numbers. Hale does not even feel it." He said that in front of my aunt once, and she laughed like it was a charming sibling joke. She did not know that I had cut back on every piece of my life. No vacations, no expensive meals, no new furniture. My world had been reduced to work payments, sleep, work payments, sleep. Still, I kept doing it. Still, I convinced myself that the house mattered to them in a way that justified what I was sacrificing. Somewhere in the middle of that relentless cycle, a small sign of power flickered across my computer screen. HR sent an email with the subject line, "Promotion Approval." I opened it and read, "Your promotion to Senior ML Engineer is approved." It should have felt like a major milestone, something to celebrate, a reason to call someone. But it felt strangely distant, like I was reading someone else's good news. I archived the email without replying and did not mention it to my mother or Noah. I just kept working. It was not humility. It was exhaustion mixed with the quiet awareness that my achievements had never shifted the family dynamic. No title or salary could change the narrative they had already written for themselves. Nights in the office blurred into one another. The glow of my monitors became the only steady light in my life. Every few months, I refreshed the mortgage statement. The total kept dropping with a kind of relentless simplicity until one evening in early 2024, I logged in and saw the new figure, $950,000 remaining. I stared at the screen for a long moment, letting the number settle into my bones. My own voice echoed in my head, quiet and tired and hopeful, in a way that hurt. One more year, I told myself. One more year, and maybe they will finally say my name in the same sentence as this house. By the time the mortgage balance hit zero, it did not feel like a victory so much as a quiet number on a screen that I stared at alone in my apartment one Friday night. 950,000 had become 600, then 300 then. Finally nothing. No balloon, no card, just a line that now read, "Mortgage balance 0.0." I closed the browser and told myself I would think about it tomorrow. Maybe even let myself celebrate in some small way that did not involve my family. The next afternoon, a regular California Saturday with lights spilling across my kitchen table, I sat with my laptop open to a travel site. It was the first time in years I had allowed myself to even consider a vacation. My cursor hovered over flights to Hawaii and a tab for a small hotel near the beach. For a few minutes, it was just me, the idea of sand, and the faint possibility of doing something with my money that was not pouring it into someone else's roof. My phone buzzed on the table. Mom flashed across the screen. I hesitated but answered. Her voice came through bright, almost cheerful, the way she sounded when she was about to tell a story she expected to land well. "Bank says we are clear. No more mortgage. You did it, honey." For a second, something warm cracked open in my chest. I smiled before I could stop myself staring at the cheap laminate of my kitchen counter, as if it were proof that I had finally kept us all from the edge. I did it, floated through my head, like the words might finally be followed by recognition. Then she kept talking. "So we are putting the house in Noah's name. It is time he has something of his own." The warmth dropped out of my body so fast I felt dizzy. My hand tightened around the phone. I said, "What?" Not loud, not dramatic, just one flat word that held 5 years of wire transfers and promotions and quiet sacrifices. She sighed, the way she does when I am being slow. "You do not even like being here. You are always working. Noah is the one who actually loves this home." She said it like this was a kindness to me, as if removing me from any formal connection to the house was a favor. In her mind, me being a constant provider somehow equaled me not needing anything real in return. I tried to find air. I said I paid that mortgage, every year, every extra dollar I had. The words sounded small through the speaker, like I was reminding her of a bill she had forgotten to open. She brushed it aside. "Do not ruin this with one of your logical arguments. This is about family. It is about Noah finally having something of his own. Logical arguments." That was what she called years of keeping the bank from taking the house she sat in while she talked to me. She framed my work as a threat to her idea of a perfect moment instead of the only reason that moment existed. I realized then that this was not a shock to her. She had thought about it, planned it, maybe even rehearsed how she would phrase it so that I would sound petty if I objected. Something inside me that had been bending for a long time bent just a little further toward breaking. I ended the call before I said something I could not pull back. My laptop screen went dark as the saver kicked in. The flight tab timed out. I shut the computer and grabbed my keys instead. There's a kind of disbelief that only eases when you put your body in the place your mind cannot quite accept. I got in my car and drove up 101 toward Palo Alto, the freeway humming beneath my tired tires, the sky too bright for how hollow my chest felt. On the way, I pictured the house the way I had always known it, with its tidy driveway and the front yard my mother liked to keep just a little better trimmed than the neighbors. By the time I turned onto their street, my jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. As I pulled into the familiar curve, I saw Martha, the older neighbor who had lived across from us for years, watering her plants. She waved at me with the casual friendliness of someone who has watched you grow up on a sidewalk. I waved back because I did not know how not to. The driveway looked exactly as it always had, clean and orderly, as if the house itself had no idea the terms of its ownership were being rewritten in my absence. I walked up the front steps, the wood still creaking in the same spot near the top, and took my keys out of my pocket. The metal felt cool and solid in my hand, something that should have meant access. I slid the key into the lock and turned. It stopped halfway in. I pulled it out, checked the grooves, then tried again. It would not go. My stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with money. I stared at the doorknob, then at the frame, and saw it. The lock was new. I knocked. Footsteps approached on the other side, then paused. The door opened just a crack, the chain still latched. Noah's face appeared in the narrow gap, his expression caught somewhere between guilt and irritation. "Mom is resting," he said. "She does not want drama today. We will talk about paperwork later." He stretched out the word paperwork like it was some vague future chore, instead of my entire financial history. I looked at him, and then down at the useless key, still warm in my palm. I could hear muffled voices and the clink of dishes behind him that told me the house was carrying on exactly as usual. I said, "I am not here for drama. I just wanted to walk into the house I spent years paying for." His eyes flicked away for a second. Then he gave a half shrug. "It is not a good time, Hale. We will call you." The door closed. The new lock clicked into place with a sound that felt louder than it should have. I stayed where I was standing on the doorstep of a house that had taken a chunk of my 20s and refused me a threshold. Martha glanced over again from across the street. Her watering can paused mid-air, like she could sense something was off, but did not know what to ask. I managed a tight smile so she would not come closer. I did not trust my voice to hold if another human being showed me an ounce of kindness in that moment. Behind the closed door, I heard a burst of laughter dishes, clinking the easy sounds of people who believed they were entitled to peace while someone else absorbed the impact of their choices. My fingers curled around the key so hard the grooves dug into my skin. Standing there, I felt a strange double exposure of every time I had told myself, family first, while sending another transfer every excuse I had made for their silence, every story I had repeated to make their comfort feel worth my cost. It was not just a door that did not open. It was the receipt for every time I had told myself, family first. That night I drove back to my apartment in silence, the kind that makes the freeway hum feel louder than it should. By the time I pushed open my front door, my body felt hollow, like someone had scooped me out and left only the shell standing. I did not turn on the television or make dinner. I went straight to the small dining table against the wall and pulled out the storage box I had been ignoring for years. The cardboard edges were worn from being moved around my apartment, but never truly opened. Tonight, it felt like the only thing in my life that still had weight. I turned on the overhead light and dumped everything out. The table became a landscape of my past decisions, mortgage statements, bank emails, PDF printouts of the refinance documents from 2021, notices from the bank confirming every payment I had ever made. My laptop glowed in the center, the refinance folder already open on the desktop from the last time I had forced myself to look at it. The pain from earlier had not faded, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the raw sting from the locked door and the sound of laughter behind it. Now it felt colder, sharper, more analytical, like my mind had switched modes without asking for permission. I began sorting papers into two piles. One I labeled in my head as cannot change. That pile held every emotional tie I had tried to maintain with my family, the stories I told myself about why I needed to help them, the belief that sacrifice would eventually turn into acknowledgement. Those papers sat untouched on the left. The second pile was the one that mattered tonight. Can change. That one held the refinance documents, the payment confirmations, and the account statements that spelled out the truth in plain numbers. As I flipped through the refinance agreement again, I noticed a line I had skimmed years ago, but never absorbed emotionally. Any transfer of title requires the signatures of all borrowers. I ran my finger along the printed text, all borrowers. That meant me. Not as a courtesy, not as a witness, as a requirement. I was not a guest in this story the way my mother tried to frame it. I was not an accessory she could dismiss with a wave of her hand. I was the person whose signature held the power they assumed they controlled. When that realization settled into my chest, something steadied inside me. The panic that had been knocking on my ribs earlier faded into a slow, cold clarity. I opened my laptop and scrolled through old emails from the refinance period. One line stood out from the bank officer. "We will list you as primary payer, given your income level." The sentence glowed on the screen like a quiet secret I had forgotten I possessed. It was not dramatic. It was factual, and it meant every narrative my mother had spun about sacrifice and keeping the house together was legally hollow. I clicked out of the email and opened my brokerage app with trembling fingers. My stock account loaded after a few seconds of lag. 7 figures stared back at me, not because I felt wealthy, because I had been disciplined, because I had been pouring everything I earned into a mortgage that they now claimed belonged entirely to someone else. No one in my family knew this number. They had never asked. They did not know how many nights I ate cheap leftovers so I could send another payment. They did not know how little I spent on myself. They thought I was just good with numbers. That was the phrase they used. Good with numbers. Conveniently emotionless, conveniently capable, conveniently invisible. I closed the brokerage tab before the anger pooling in my chest could spill over. Instead, I turned back to the table and pulled my scanner from the bottom drawer. If I was going to step into this fight, I needed to do it the way I did everything else in my life, with order, with proof, with a paper trail that did not flinch. One by one, I scanned every important document and saved each file into a new folder in my cloud drive. I titled it House Legal. Inside that folder, I created subfolders with names that made the truth impossible to ignore. Refinance 2021 signed by me. Emails mom requesting payment. Statements proof of transfer. It felt strangely grounding to see the documents line up neatly on my screen. This was how women like me reclaimed order when the world tilted. We did not shout first. We gathered proof. We kept receipts. We turned chaos into files. When everything was finally scanned and stored, I sat back in my chair and let the weight of what I had built and what they had tried to erase settle into the quiet of my small apartment. The room felt different now, Not safe exactly, but defined, contained. I opened a browser tab and typed slowly with fingers that no longer shook. Real estate attorney Palo Alto dispute title. The search results populated instantly. Names, offices, consultations, options, power. My breath steadied as the screen reflected the new shape of my resolve. They thought I was just good with numbers. Nobody asked what happens when the person who reads contracts stops pretending she does not. 2 days after I built the folder labeled House Legal, I sat in the parking lot on University Avenue staring at the modest brick building that housed the attorney whose name kept appearing at the top of my search results. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee from a shop down the street. The entire scene felt too quiet for what I was about to do, but quiet had become the natural tone of everything since the night my mother locked me out of the house I paid for. I pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. The waiting room was small with framed certificates on the wall and muted gray chairs arranged in a neat line. No dramatics, no theatrics, simply a space built for paperwork and truth. The attorney was a man in his 50s with the calm, steady posture of someone who had seen every version of family conflict and knew how to separate emotion from leverage. His features hinted at a mix of Asian and Latin American heritage, and he spoke with a softness that made every word feel grounded rather than sharp. I placed my folder on his desk. He looked through each document with careful attention, pausing occasionally to ask clarifying questions. When he finished, he folded his hands together and said something that shifted the weight of everything I thought I understood. The house is worth $7 to $8 million on the current Palo Alto market. There is no remaining mortgage. That means the property is a substantial asset. I nodded, though the number still felt unreal, even though I knew its market value for years. Seeing it framed as an asset I had actively protected made it feel heavier. He continued, Linda and Noah are attempting to gift the house, likely to avoid some of the tax implications. But if the title is marked with a dispute, nothing moves. No lender will approve, no buyer will consider. Everything stalls until you agree. His wording created a clean, straight line between my signature and their plans, a line they could not cross without me. He began outlining options, and each one sounded like a quiet key, turning in a lock they had not realized I controlled. First, he said we file a lis pendens with the county. That tells anyone who looks at the title that there is an active dispute. It freezes any attempt to transfer ownership. I imagined my mother receiving notice from the county and the sudden panic that would ripple through the version of the story she had been selling to relatives. Second, he said, we send a formal letter of notice to your mother and to Noah. It states clearly that any changes to the title require your signature. It does not accuse anything. It simply asserts fact. He explained it plainly and calmly, like he was describing a simple maintenance procedure rather than the beginning of a legal barricade that would halt every plan my mother had already put in motion. The clarity of it steadied something inside me. For the first time in months, I felt the ground beneath my feet instead of the constant tilt of being erased from my own decisions. The attorney added, "These steps do not escalate emotionally. They escalate legally. And that is stronger." That was what I had been missing for years. I had been speaking in the language of effort while my mother spoke in the language of entitlement. Now I was learning the language of contracts. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the caller ID and saw my company's number. I answered quietly while stepping onto the sidewalk. A voice from HR said the words, "We are preparing for another funding round and stock valuations are projected to increase. Your equity is tracking upward." I looked up at the line of trees along the street. Their branches flickered in the afternoon light. The timing felt almost surreal. For years I had lived as though the house was the center of gravity around which my choices orbited. But now the numbers made it clear I was not financially dependent on any of them. If anything, they had been dependent on me while assuming I would always bend. I ended the call and exhaled a long, slow breath that felt like opening a window in a room I had been trapped in. When I stepped back into the attorney's office to finalize paperwork, he glanced at me with a knowing expression, as if he could sense the shift. He slid the first set of documents toward me. Before I signed, he asked one question, his voice steady, not probing. "Do you want them out of the house, or just the truth on paper?" I held the pen, but did not sign yet. I thought of the years of payments, the nights in the office, the silence at family gatherings, the locked door, the words, "You do not even like being here." I thought of my mother's toast to Noah, the new owner of our family home. Then I answered slowly and clearly. I want the story to stop pretending I was never here. It was not anger speaking. It was something firmer, something that had been waiting a long time for daylight. After I signed the documents with the attorney, the legal process did not explode with drama the way television shows pretend it does. It moved silently in the background like code, running on a server somewhere, while life on the surface went on. On the surface, my mother and Noah doubled down on the version of the story they had already chosen. A few days after my meeting, I opened our family group chat and saw a notification that my mother was starting a FaceTime call with relatives. I did not join, but the call rang on my laptop where it was still linked to my account, and the sound spilled out across my apartment. I could hear my aunt from New York, my uncle from Texas, and my mother at the center of it all. Her voice carried that bright, proud tone she reserved for announcements. "We finally own the house outright," she said. "Noah will be on the deed soon." The words hit like a translation error now. I knew the mortgage was gone because I had paid it. I knew the deed could not move without my consent because I had just signed paperwork to make sure of that. But in her telling, none of that existed. It was just we and Noah, as if my role had been a rumor. Later that week, I made the mistake of opening social media. Noah had posted a short video on Instagram and mirrored it on TikTok. In it, he stood in front of the Palo Alto house with the sun at his back and the camera angled up to make the place look even larger. The caption read, "From nothing to this," followed by a line about hard work and believing in yourself. There was not a single word about who had wired the money that kept the bank from posting a foreclosure sign on that very lawn. Comment after comment praised him for making it. People wrote things like, "Proud of you, man, and your parents must be so relieved." I set my phone down before the mixture of anger and disbelief swallowed the rest of my evening. It was one thing to be erased inside the family. It was another to watch the erasure broadcast as a feel-good story. The worst part was how practiced it all sounded. A few nights later, I walked past my phone on the counter and heard my mother's voice floating from the speaker. She had called one of my aunts, and because her phone was on speaker, I heard more than she meant me to. "Hale just does not get family," she was saying. "She thinks everything is a transaction." I stood there motionless, listening to her reduce years of sacrifice to a personality flaw. To her, I was not the person who had kept the lights on and the roof above her head. I was the difficult daughter who insisted on seeing numbers, where she insisted there was only love. The irony pressed against my ribs until it almost hurt. She was talking about me that way while sitting in a house I had kept from becoming a bank asset. But I did not interrupt. I did not call her back to argue. I let the sentence hang in the air and then fade, because by then my response was not about words. It was about documents. While my mother curated her version of the story, I turned my attention fully to the steps the attorney had outlined. We filed the lis pendens with the county a notice that attached itself to the property records like a quiet red flag. When it was processed, an email arrived in my inbox from the Santa Clara County system confirming that the document had been recorded against the house. The language was dry, almost boring, but it carried more force than any accusation I could have shouted at a family dinner. Anyone who tried to move that title now would see the dispute before they even picked up a pen. After that, I drafted an email to my mother. I kept it short and polite and copied my attorney at the bottom. For clarity, any changes to title must involve my written consent. I would like us to be on the same page. That was all. No emotion, no accusations, just the legal truth laid out in a sentence that would sit in her inbox whether she chose to acknowledge it or not. I imagined the moment she opened it. In my mind, I saw her sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop propped open, her face tightening as she read the words. I could almost hear Noah in the background asking, "What does she mean, consent?" And my mother brushing it off with the same dismissive tone she used on the phone with my aunt. "It is nothing. She is just being dramatic." That was her favorite way to shrink me down to something she did not have to take seriously. But this time it was not nothing, and I was not simply being dramatic. The county records did not care about her version of my personality. They only cared about signatures and filings and the sequence of payments that had flowed from my accounts to the bank. A few days after the lis pendens went through, an older neighbor named Martha, who had watched our family for years, saw 2 county employees walk up to the Palo Alto house. They carried a large envelope stamped with official markings. She watched from across the street as they handed it to my mother at the door. In plain black type, it said, "Notice of pending action." The house had a new label now, not a gift, not a reward, a dispute. For once, I was not the only one who knew. The invitation called it a small celebration, a casual Sunday gathering to bless the next chapter of the family home. But when I stepped through the side gate of the Palo Alto backyard, it felt staged like a scene already scripted without me. Balloons in muted gold hung from the fence, a folding table held casseroles from neighbors, and my mother stood near the patio holding a glass as if she had been waiting for applause. People milled around, relatives from New York, friends of my mother, co-workers from her real estate office, Noah's friends, and Martha, the neighbor who always watered her roses at the same time every morning. I stayed near the entrance, watching unnoticed as my mother raised her voice and the conversation softened around her. "We worked, sacrificed, prayed, and now Noah will carry this home into the next generation," she said. Her tone was triumphant and polished, as if the story had been rehearsed until it sounded holy. A cousin asked from the crowd, "And Hale?" My mother gave a quick laugh, the kind people use when they want to dismiss something without looking cruel. "Hale has her own life," she said. "She does not need this place." My name landed in the yard like something foreign, something optional. A few heads turned as if realizing only then that I was not part of the narrative being celebrated. That was when I stepped forward. Quiet enough that no one noticed at first, then visible enough that people shifted to make space. I held a thin folder in my hand, nothing dramatic, no flourish, just paper that had waited long enough to speak. I waited for the applause to settle. I waited for Noah's smirk as he lounged on the patio couch, soaking in the attention. Only then did I say the sentence that cut through the noise. "Quick update, Santa Clara County disagrees with that part about the house already being his." The yard froze. A fork clinked onto a plate. My mother blinked twice as if trying to redraw the outline of her story. I opened the folder and held out the first page, the recorded lis pendens, printed with county timestamp, visible enough for anyone standing close. Then the refinance documents with my name in bold at the borrower line, the interest rate, the payment history, the trail of numbers that had kept the bank from taking the house. People leaned in the way they do when gossip shifts from rumor to proof. A distant aunt spoke first. "Wait, you paid the mortgage." Her voice was almost too loud from shock. Martha, the neighbor, answered before I could. I saw her bringing checks and talking to the bank, while Linda called it her fight. Martha's voice did not rise, but the certainty in it sliced cleaner than anything I could have said. My mother swallowed hard and forced a gentle smile, though her eyes were sharp with warning. "We are family," she said. "We do not need legalese between us." She reached for me with her tone, not her hand painting herself as the one trying to keep peace. My attorney friend Kate, the one I had spoken to earlier that morning, happened to be on the phone in my pocket when I tapped speaker. "Legalese is what kept your house from the bank," she said calmly, "and from being gifted behind her back." A ripple went through the crowd. Someone whispered gifted. Another whispered behind her back. Noah shot to his feet, his face burning red. "You are ruining my life," he snapped. but his voice cracked as if even he heard how flimsy the accusation sounded in front of all those documents. I looked at him for a long moment, holding the folder lightly at my side. "I'm just reading out loud what you all signed," I said. No anger, no volume. Just the truth laid bare the way sunlight exposes dust. The yard fell into a silence that did not feel peaceful. It felt corrective, like gravity finally remembering what direction it pulls. People stared at my mother with a different kind of curiosity, one that asked questions she did not want to answer. Others stared at me, maybe re-evaluating every version of the story they had heard. Cousins whispered among themselves. One co-worker of my mother cleared her throat and stepped back as if she wanted distance from the unfolding mess. Martha folded her arms, nodding slowly, as if every detail matched what she had long suspected. Even the wind felt still. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but no sentence arrived. Noah paced once, then twice, looking for someone to blame, someone who was not himself or the myth he had helped her build. I held the folder a little tighter, feeling the weight of the papers not as proof of victory, but as proof of what had been taken from me in silence. People watched, waiting to see what I would do next, waiting to hear what would come after public truth finally cut through public performance. And that tension, that stillness, that question hanging in the air pulled the entire yard forward as if the next moment would decide everything. The backyard fell quiet long after the last murmurs faded, yet the silence did not feel like resolution. It felt like the pause after a plate shatters, the moment when everyone realizes nothing will fit the same way again. In the days that followed, the consequences arrived faster than either my mother or Noah could absorb. The county record updated first. A bright, clear notice that any lender or buyer would immediately see printed beneath the property entry. Dispute active. Title transfer restricted. It was the kind of language that stopped everything, the kind that made even seasoned real estate agents shake their heads. Noah learned this the hard way when he tried to apply for a business loan using the house as collateral. The bank officer called him back with a tone that suggested embarrassment. "We cannot use a property that is currently in dispute. You will need signatures from all borrowers." The moment he heard that, he stormed out of the branch, his face red, as if someone had closed a door on his future, without warning. My mother faced her own wall of reality. For years, she had romanticized the house as a symbol of sacrifice and legacy, something she could present to relatives and neighbors as proof of endurance. Now it sat on her shoulders like a weight she had never expected to carry alone. Without the ability to transfer title and without my unpaid contributions, she confronted the numbers: property, tax, maintenance insurance, all those responsibilities she had once thought she could pass along to Noah with a ceremonial toast. She could not ignore the math, not anymore, and people around her began to see the truth. Messages trickled into my phone from relatives who had been at the party and even from those who had only heard about it afterward. I had no idea. One cousin texted. Another said, "I thought you were cold, but I did not know you carried the whole mortgage." A distant aunt sent a longer note admitting she had always assumed the house was kept afloat through my mother's grit. Now she realized the grit was mostly mine in the form of stock sales, long nights at my desk, and bonus checks routed straight into a loan I never lived under. These confessions did not comfort me. They only confirmed how fully I had erased myself to make everyone else comfortable. I did not feel victorious. I felt like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room I had been paying rent for in the dark. With the truth exposed, the emotional fallout settled in, slowly but steadily. My mother avoided speaking to me unless absolutely necessary. Her voice clipped and unsure every time she attempted to retell the story in a way that made her look less responsible. But the facts kept rising to the surface. She could not change the refinancing documents. She could not undo the payment records. She could not erase the county notice. Noah drowned louder than she did, throwing his frustration at anyone nearby. The collateral denial was only the beginning. His friends stopped calling as frequently, the sheen of being the future owner of an $8 million property, now replaced by the reality of living in a house frozen in legal limbo. He tried to blame me for everything as if truth were a personal attack, but the unraveling was bigger than his anger. It was the collapse of a story I had allowed them to build atop my labor and silence. Meanwhile, I sat with the shifting emotional ground. I did not enjoy seeing them struggle, but I could not pretend their struggle was not earned. I had bought them time for years at the cost of my own future. Now time was no longer a gift I was willing to hand over. One afternoon I walked by the house from across the street just far enough to remain unseen. The shutters were half closed. A sign taped on the mailbox read "No solicitation," the lawn slightly less manicured than usual. My mother was inside somewhere, organizing and reorganizing the numbers, trying to find a version of the story that did not require acknowledging me. But the numbers would not bend. They were printed, stamped, recorded. They had my name on them. My attorney met me later that week in her office, the same one overlooking University Avenue, where the quiet hum of the city never stopped. She placed a folder in front of me before asking the question that would determine the tone of the next chapter. "Do you want to push for a forced sale?" I looked at the house through the window of my memory, the dinners, the silence, the expectations, the weight of being the fallback, the dependable one, the invisible foundation. Then the backyard celebration where the truth finally cracked open. "I want to see what they do when the story does not bend around them anymore," I said. It was not revenge, not exactly. It was accountability measured in honesty and consequence. And for the first time in years, I felt the shape of the story shifting in my direction, not because I forced it, but because I finally stopped carrying it alone. When the call finally came from my mother, it did not arrive with yelling or accusations. It arrived as a text message that read, "Can we talk like adults? Coffee downtown. My treat." For a moment, I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar tug of old patterns, the part of me that would have rushed to whatever table she chose and tried to smooth things over. But the person who had filed a lis pendens and stood in the backyard reading out documents was not the same daughter who swallowed every slight. So I agreed on one condition: that we meet in a public place where neither of us could escalate into the old roles so easily. A few days later, I walked into a small cafe in downtown Palo Alto, the kind with big windows and white tile, and the low murmur of people typing on laptops. My mother was already there at a corner table. She wore a neat blouse and her hair was styled, but there were shadows under her eyes and a tightness in her jaw that had not been there a year ago. The image of the perfectly composed woman who toasted Noah's future had cracked. Financial strain had threaded itself into the way she held her shoulders and the way her eyes darted toward the door each time it opened, as if she expected bad news to walk in on two legs. I sat down across from her. For a moment, we simply looked at each other, two people who shared a history, but now stood on opposite sides of a line drawn in ink and county records. She did not bother with small talk for long. After a few comments about the weather and work, she folded her hands tightly and spoke. "We cannot refinance without you. The taxes, the upkeep, it is too much. Maybe you could just sign some things to give Noah security." There it was, the audacity wrapped in a plea. Not an apology, not a recognition of what she had done, just the expectation that I would step back into the role of unpaid safety net. She looked at me with a practiced softness, the same one she had used on relatives when she told stories about fighting for the house. Then she added the hook she thought might still work on me. "After all I have done for you." The words hung between us, absurd and heavy. I let them sit there for a moment because I wanted to feel my reaction fully before I answered. Once upon a time, that sentence would have sent me scrambling through my memories to find proof that she was right, that I owed her something immeasurable. Now it only brought back images of me sitting in a fluorescent office selling RSU to cover her mortgage while she told people we had fought so hard. I did not raise my voice. I did not lean forward. I kept my tone steady. "You did not do the 5.2 million, I said slowly. "I did. And you told a room full of people I should be happy losing it." She flinched almost imperceptibly at the exact number, at the reminder that I could quantify what she preferred, to keep vague and sentimental. Her eyes welled as if the fact of my precision wounded her more than the reality of what she had said. I kept going because this was the moment to draw lines, not erase them. "You asked me to cover payments until you were stable." I continued. "I did that for years. You said we. You never said my name. Now you are asking me to sign things again so Noah can have security. I'm not doing that." Her lips trembled slightly. The cafe noise blurred into a soft background hum around us. She tried a different angle. "We are drowning, Hale. Property, taxes, the yard, the repairs, everything costs more. We just need you to help us restructure so he is safe." There was that word again. We, us, safe. As if those ideas had always conveniently included me, when in reality they only reached for me when they needed a signature or a transfer. I nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding. "I hear that it is hard," I said. "So here are the options. You sell the house and we divide the money according to what each of us put in. Or you and Noah rent the house from me under a clear lease while you figure out your next move. Those are the choices that make sense." Her composure cracked then. Tears spilled over as she stared at me like she did not recognize the daughter in front of her. "So you are really choosing money over family," she whispered. There it was, the line designed to make me feel like the cruel one, the ungrateful one, the one who had abandoned some sacred obligation. I took a breath. "No," I said. "I am choosing not to be the only one who pays for a version of family that erases me. The difference matters." My voice stayed quiet, but the words were firm enough that even the couple at the next table glanced over. My mother wiped at her eyes with a napkin, her hand shaking slightly. She looked down at the table as if the wood grain might offer a script. When it did not, she stood up abruptly, chair scraping lightly against the tile. "Fine," she said, her voice hoarse. "I see how it is." Without another word, she grabbed her purse and walked out of the cafe. Through the window, I watched her step onto the sidewalk, pull her phone from her bag, and press it to her ear as she hurried down the street. She did not know I could read lips well enough to catch the words. She is serious. She will not save us this time. I stayed seated, fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. The old reflex to chase after her rose once then faded. I let it. Instead, I sat with the echo of what I had just done. The thing about being the safety net is this. The day you step aside, everybody finally learns how high they have been walking. 1 year later, the shape of my life looked nothing like the version my mother used to recite to relatives. I woke up most mornings in a quiet condo in San Jose, a place that was neither extravagant nor humble, but unmistakably mine. Sunlight filtered through wide windows onto a kitchen counter that held only the things I chose and paid for. No inherited expectations, no emotional rent due, just a home that fit exactly the size of my own presence. The house in Palo Alto, the one that had once hovered over every decision I made, no longer dominated my horizon. It still existed, of course, but it lived in a different category now. It had been rented out under a professional lease to a family who treated it as a place to live rather than a symbol to parade. Their monthly payments arrived like clockwork, steady and neutral and oddly peaceful, a reminder that the house could be something other than a battlefield. Sometimes I saw photos the tenants sent of their kids on the lawn or vegetables grown in the raised beds, and it struck me how much healthier the house looked when no one inside it was trying to turn me into a ghost. Meanwhile, the part of my life I had always kept quiet had blossomed into something unmistakable. The company where I had spent years coding in late hours and surviving reorganizations finally went public. The stocks I had collected quietly selling some, only to feed a mortgage that was never mine, had multiplied into a number that felt unreal the first time I saw it spelled out. Several $1,000,000. A figure that would have once made me dizzy, now simply settled into place as another component of my financial stability. By the time my mother asked for help again, the house was no longer the biggest number attached to my name. That was the truth that shifted everything. The revenge, if anyone wanted to call it that, had never been about clinging to an $8 million property. It was about refusing to let my worth be measured by a house my mother believed she could assign away like a reward. Once my net worth eclipsed the home, I understood how small that house truly was in the grand scheme of my life. It had loomed so large only because I had allowed the story around it to shrink me. I chose not to let that happen anymore. With the rental income steady and my own finances intact, I decided to do something useful with a portion of what the house generated. I created a small scholarship fund for young women pursuing STEM degrees, especially those coming from families crushed by debt or financial instability. I gave the fund a neutral name. No family surnames, no dedications to my mother or to any legacy that had demanded my silence. It existed because I wanted it to exist, not because I needed to prove anything to anyone. As for the remaining equity in the Palo Alto property, I kept it exactly where it belonged on my balance sheet as one line among many. Not a monument, not a family altar, just an asset managed reasonably and without emotion. Meanwhile, my mother and Noah faced the consequences that had been waiting for them long before I stopped shielding them. Without the house as their showpiece, they moved into a smaller rental outside Palo Alto. The new place had no manicured lawn, no grand entryway, no image to project to visitors. It was simply a place to live the way most people live by paying for what they actually own. In those early months, they reached out a few times to ask for money, never directly at first. A hinted request, a subtle mention of bills, a suggestion that things were tighter than expected. Each time I replied with a brief, polite email confirming that I hoped things worked out for them, but that I would not be contributing. There was no venom in my words, no lingering desire to hurt them, only boundaries, solid ones. They had taught me through action and inaction that family could erase you if it served their story. I had learned finally that I did not have to participate in that story anymore. I did not hate them. I just stopped offering myself as the missing line item in their budget. That clarity warmed me more than any sense of triumph could. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table in the condo, I looked out the window and saw a family in the building across from mine. A young girl was studying at the dining table, while her parents sat on either side going through paperwork together. They were splitting the load, sharing the weight, navigating the ordinary math of living without asking one person to carry the entire equation. It was a simple scene, but it stirred something in me. A reminder that a family built without exploitation did exist, that cooperation was not a fantasy, that love did not have to be purchased through silence or sacrifice. The voice inside me, the one that had learned to narrate my life honestly, now rose with calm certainty. If you are the one who always fixes the mess and never gets written into the story, remember this: you are allowed to take your name and your money back. And for anyone watching who has lived a version of this, who has paid for a family legacy that somehow did not include them, tell me in the comments. I read every story.